Good morning, and thank you for letting me be here. I'm honored and excited to be at a conference where the focus is about improving the public's trust in the court system because it's so important. And as I thought about my talk today, bridging the gap with the people we serve and improving public trust, I was reminded about an event and experience I had last summer that really brought the idea of trust and the erosion of trust into sharper focus. So you see, I decided to take some Spanish language lessons. And I took those lessons at a Spanish language center in Phoenix. And after, well, a few short weeks, I decided I was ready for a language and immersion program in Guatemala. So rather than try to figure out the best program, the best place to stay, the best cultural things to do while I was there, I decided to sign up with the owner's, the Spanish Language Center's owner's trip. She had been to Guatemala many times, and she was leading a trip last June, not this past June, a year ago. And so I thought, I had known her, Yolima, for a couple of years, and she was always warm, and she was friendly, and her language center was helpful. I was learning Spanish. So I didn't ask many questions. I just signed up and packed a bag. Here's the problem. A few days, about 10 days before we were supposed to leave, Volcano de Fuego started erupting. And perhaps you heard about that in the news. Many people who lived on or near that volcano died, and the smoke and dangerous ash went into the sky. The Guatemala City airport was closed off and on in those few days before the trip. So I began to rethink the trip. But Yolima reached out to the group and said, Antigua, where we're staying as far from the volcano, we're going to be just fine. So if the Guatemala City airport's open, let's go. Well, with my trust chips, and those are the blue ones there, in her favor, I believed her. Even though I had done internet research, and it turns out Antigua is 16 kilometers or 9.9 miles from Antigua. But I believed her, packed my bag, and I went because the Guatemala City airport was open that morning. It's fine. Next day, we're about to take a walking tour of the quaint town of Antigua. I recommend it if you've not been there. And before we left, I said, hey, Yolima, should we bring an umbrella for our walking tour today? Is it going to rain? I heard it's going to rain in La Lluvia. I think I got that right. Anyway, she looks up and she says, no need. Again, with all my trust chips on her side, I thought, okay, that's fine. Well, guess what? It did rain. I thought, okay, she can guess wrong. The weather forecasters do. Again, I began to believe her because of the trust chips, but perhaps one little chip moved over to the distrust side. I thought, okay. Well, a few days into our trip, one of my trip mates showed me a photograph. Well, when we were walking around, I should back up. We were walking around Antigua, and I said, all these volcanoes, Yolima, which one is Volcano de Fuego? I want to see it. And she said, you can't see it from here. It's far away. Okay. Yet, a few days into the trip, one of my friends showed me pictures of Volcano de Fuego erupting with smoke and ash coming into the air. I'm like, where did you see that? What trip are you on? I was surprised. She says, Jill, it's outside my window, the door of my room. I'm on the second floor. So I walk over to her room and look straight ahead, and this is what I saw. I was shocked, and I was concerned. And another distrust chip grew, and one fell off the trust side. And over time, I began to notice that she would kind of shade the truth. Maybe she told some half-truths, some perhaps even lies, I don't know. But I began to be concerned about what she was saying and whether I could trust her, especially after seeing Volcano de Fuego with that ash. So at the end of the first week, she said, listen, we're going to pack a small bag, pack just a backpack. We're going to go to another area, see some nature preserves, etc. And you just need a pair of shorts, swimsuits. It's going to be warm. Don't worry about it. Well, I had some more growing distrust chips over the time, and I got concerned. And I Googled the weather, and it said cool and lots of rain. So by this point, I was concerned, and I said, she wanted me to pack in that. I packed in that. That was my entire suitcase for the trip. And that's because I frankly wondered what was true, what was not true. And you know what? The same happened for the others who said, I don't know what to pack. And they packed in their suitcases too, which meant that we had to put all of our luggage up top because the book bags weren't going to fit in the back of the van we were going to sit in. We had to stop in Guatemala City. It cost the tour operator who was driving the van time and money. We had to stop and get a tarp so we could cover all the suitcases, etc. But I'm glad we did, because that short trip took 8 hours through torrential rains. The tarp was no match, and my suitcase was drenched when we got to our place, and it was very cold. So after that, the distrust chips just kept growing and growing, and the trust chips kept coming off the scales. And I know that these are not exactly the scales of justice, but it's what I had available. And of course, I'm using, poker chips because after all, we're in Vegas. So, what happened? After that, I stopped listening to her altogether. I rejected all of her advice. In fact, I actually did the opposite of what she advised us to do. And that proved to be the correct choice. So, why am I telling you this story? I am because it's a story about trust, the erosion of trust, and what happens as a result. While she led a group to Machu Picchu this summer, I didn't go, I didn't sign up, and I recommended others don't go because you never know what's going to happen. The bottom line is we can forgive small lies, half-truths, but over time, it's hard to believe people who can't be trusted. Whether it's a half-truth or an outright lie due to ignorance, misplaced optimism, malintent, the result is the same. When someone lies, leaves out important facts, or shades the truth, the needle quickly moves from trust to distrust, and it can be time-consuming and very costly to restore, if it's restored at all. And here's why. People start triple-checking everything you're doing and everything you're saying, which takes more time and to get things done, and it's more costly. When people mistrust you, they doubt you before you even open your mouth. You can communicate with precision, but they will probably misinterpret you and discount what you say. At the least, they probably are suspicious, which taints everything you do and say. Distrust breeds anger, frustration, and fear. Interacting with somebody you don't trust is like walking through a minefield. Alternatively, when people trust you, you have the benefit of the doubt. And when you make a mistake, like Yolima did with the rain, people say, don't worry about it, forget about it. In a high-trust relationship, you can communicate, but you can even miscommunicate, but people will get your meaning. So, as you know, trust is particularly important for the courts. Without the public's trust and confidence in the court system as a place of fairness, integrity, and justice, it can't function as it was designed to do. So how does trust, or perhaps unfortunately at times the erosion of trust, play out in the court system? Well, before somebody interacts with or is impacted by the courts, the scales, let's see if I get that right, whoops. The scales might look even, kind of like that, because someone neither trusts or distrusts the courts. But chips pile up on one side or the other as they have experiences, whether it's a wedding, an adoption, citizenship ceremony, or less pleasant circumstances such as juvenile, family, or criminal court. And chips pile up one at a time on one side or the other. And that pile impacts the next encounter they and perhaps their family and their friends have when they have to access the courts. Some people have had no previous encounter with the courts, but they've heard or read things in the newspaper, and that tends to build up their trust or distrust chips in one direction or the other as they arrive for jury duty or as a witness in a case that's really not about them. So, when I think about the public's trust in the court system, I kind of think about this definition. I'm not sure where to put this. So it's a place where the public has the confidence in the court to reliably deliver justice in a fair, equitable, and accessible way for all. And the trust and distrust chips color the lens through which the public determines whether they feel it's a place of justice and fairness, whether it's a place where they have access to true justice. So the question is, and I think you're going to explore that throughout your time here in Las Vegas, well, when you're in the conference at least, is how do you, as officers of these various courts from around the country or perhaps around the world, create an environment that the public believes and feels is a place where justice is done? How do you create an environment where people have confidence in the intentions and the actions of the people in the court system? I mean, we don't exactly wake up and put our trust chips or distrust chips in our pockets and dole out the trust chips like sleeves of mint, those thin mint cookies at Girl Scout cookie season. Trust can often feel very amorphous, kind of a hard to put your finger on it type of concept. It's hard to point to. It's hard to see. It's hard sometimes to even do justice, because sometimes it doesn't feel tangible. But when trust is broken or even established, we see it in very tangible ways. So when I am wrapping my head around what I call amorphous ideas, I like to look at the dictionary. Yeah, I take out Webster's to wrap my head around amorphous ideas so that I can start making it more tangible with specific strategies to deal with it. So, definition of trust out of the dictionary: a firm belief in the reliability, strength, ability of someone or something, or one in which confidence is placed. So, the first part is about your character. Someone who's reliable, can be trusted, believed, because he or she speaks and behaves in a way you'd expect. They keep their promises. They speak with honesty and integrity. They don't hide the facts, and they don't speak in shades of truth. The second part has to do with your confidence in the other. It's whether they believe that person has the ability to perform. So it's about competence, but competence in the relevant area. So I trust my doctor to fix my cough, but not fix my car. So it's confidence that they can help you in the relevant area. And both dimensions are vital. So I'm going to tell you that there's no magic formula or one way to achieve success in building up trust. But I'm going to talk today in this session, about a few ways you can improve trust and communication, and then in the follow-up workshop with more concrete strategies specifically related to communication effectiveness. So, by developing an awareness of ourselves and others, specific aspects of emotional intelligence that relate to trust, and effective ways to communicate and interact with the public, we can establish or improve trust in very tangible ways. And this is where you have a lot of control. So I'm going to focus in my sessions on you as individuals, on your intrapersonal skills and your interpersonal skills, rather than the court system as an institution, because throughout this conference, you'll be hearing quite a bit about that. And I'm going to build on what I'm doing now in the next workshop with some specific grab-and-go strategies. Since we're going to cover some of the topics I would normally do in that other conference, we can do a deeper dive over there. So some of these are going to feel like good reminders and feel less tangible. But I can't overemphasize the opportunity to consider turning what you might think is a good reminder into a specific, tangible choice about how you think, behave, and speak. I hope to build up your sensitivity to the idea that in every interaction with each other, with your peers at work, with those that you supervise, and with the public, you are always making decisions for the other person. Are we building trust chips or distrust chips? So let's start with the basics, self-awareness. Self-awareness is really foundational to everything else you can do in developing your interpersonal and intrapersonal skills. And it's a starting point of any leadership training. It's a foundation for everything we're going to talk about. So once you understand yourself, which includes your strengths and your blind spots and areas of growth, and learn how others perceive you, then you can start taking control over how to make improvements that will help you develop trust chips. So the first one is inward focus, learning to recognize your feelings, your preferences, and biases. Know why you're feeling this way. So some of you have triggers. Perhaps you have a knot in your stomach when you see somebody, or the hair stands up in the back of your head when you see the phone on your cell phone ring and you can see the number and you recognize it. Or perhaps you become tense at times when interacting with certain people or when doing certain things. Sometimes you just feel out of sorts and irritable. The next step is first to notice that, and I've, in my leadership training, suggest that people jot notes for 2 weeks. Start taking notes. When are you having these triggers? And then start dissecting, why am I feeling this way? Why do I feel tense when Bob Smith comes toward me in the morning? Or why do I have a knot in my stomach or feel dread when my inbox is completely full before the day starts? So the goal is not to stop feeling this way or even to analyze it to death. It's just to notice it, because that's the first step so that you can begin to alter your behavior to avoid alienating others. So the other is outward focus. How do others perceive me? How do others perceive how I look, sound, and behave? And while we all see ourselves through our own intentions, and you mean well, and perhaps you have some experiences where you interact with folks meaning well, maybe you propose a bunch of solutions, but they weren't looking for that, and you come across as domineering, and something you didn't realize simply by making those suggestions. So it's critical to understand what's going on the inside. It's also to know how your behavior comes across to others so that you can begin to adjust your style for maximum effectiveness, okay? So there are some challenges, though, to self-awareness, and I'm going to talk about two. One I just recently added because times have changed. But the first one is fairly obvious. Distraction. We live in the world of autopilot and distractions. Our minds never stop moving. My guess is right now, yours haven't stopped moving. You might be ruminating about the past, thinking about what went wrong, or worrying about the future. It's what we do. And busy professionals have very little extra time to do focused work like self-awareness. I get that. As a trial lawyer for nearly 30 years and a single mother since my daughter was 8 weeks old, I had to keep a lot of balls in the air. And I didn't think about necessarily how I was coming across to others, because daycare closes at 6 and not 6:05. So I get it. But effectiveness in our roles and in our interpersonal relationships can be undermined when we don't take the time to be aware of how we're coming across to others, and also take the time to understand how we're feeling. And I know that it is hard to focus. And let me show you what I mean. So these guys, I live in Phoenix, Arizona, which you think is a desert, but I have grass in my front yard. And in my area of Phoenix, it's an older area, we have flood irrigation. So twice a month in the summer, once a month in the winter, water comes through a canal system and then opens up into each lawn, gives us about 2 inches of water, and then goes to the next house. And that's all the water that my yard gets. So one morning I was sitting at the kitchen table and I was looking out, and these two guys showed up in my front yard, swimming in my water. I was shocked. And my first instinct was to grab my camera. So I get up and I start to go get it. And I said, wait a minute. I can simply be present and enjoy these ducks, because we don't get them very often, if at all. So I sat down. But you know what I did, because you're seeing this photograph. So it is very, very difficult. So how can we focus our attention? How can we practice being mindful so that we can begin to be more self-aware? I suggest attention training. Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, a leader in mindfulness training and stress reduction research, explains that it's an intentional focus on the present moment and setting aside our biases and our judgment filters. So it's simply about paying attention in the moment, on purpose, without judgment. And practicing attentiveness is a way for us to begin to understand and truly be aware of our bodies and what our minds are doing, so that we can be more clear-minded at understanding and perceiving things how they really are. So they do help you, that does help you manage yourself. So most gurus are going to say, practice mindfulness 20 minutes a day, focus on your breathing, etc. I get that you're busy professionals, and I was too. So I suggest instead, if you don't have that kind of time, or you're just not comfortable doing that, I suggest that you integrate mindfulness into your everyday lives. Even busy professionals, such as yourselves, can move from a life of distraction and autopilot and mental chatter to one of intentional focus. It's, to me, more of a mindset. It's not an activity that I go and donate 20 minutes to. So how do we do this? Train the brain to be more mindful by simply taking 3 deep breaths. You can do that. We can do that here. That does bring some calm and clarity. You can do it in meetings. So for example, I know that many of you are looking at your phones right now. I'm not going to call you out, no judgment. That's okay. I see those heads tilted. Can't get away with it. But consider noticing it and bringing your mind back to what we're doing right here. No judgment, just, yeah, I'm not listening, I'm not truly here. Bring yourself back. And the last thing you can do is just practice this if you're uncomfortable doing that now and feel the need to look at your phone or ruminate about yesterday or how you're going to get to the next meeting. Just practice it on your way to work every day. You have to go from your car to the office. Turn off the phone and use your senses. What are you hearing? What are you smelling? Etc. Just focusing on your senses will help you bring some clarity and calmness so that you can truly see yourself as you truly are. So there's another recent phenomenon that makes it difficult to see ourselves as we are, and that's social media. So that's me on the rock. And yes, I posted it with the words, I made it, counted the number of likes, which affirmed my accomplishment. So why am I sharing this with you? I'm sharing it with you, and it's a recent thing that we see with social media, because it really does keep us from seeing ourselves as we truly are. So I'm going to share my backstory, be a little vulnerable here. So that adventure started long before sunrise, about 4 a.m. Got up and I ate a hearty breakfast. I showered and I blew my hair dry, put on the makeup to look good, not too good, but look good for this group I hadn't yet met. And as I drove to the trailhead, I started thinking, oh my God, I started worrying, that hike is for advanced hikers. Perhaps I'm not going to make it. And as we started up the hill, I started having even more concerns on my face. What if they go up at lightning speed and I end up in the wrong fork in the road, and instead of getting to the top, I end up somewhere without cell service? Well, got to the top, sweat beating down my face. My legs were so tired. But with this photograph in silhouette, no one was the wiser, right? So people do share their lives and curate them, and that's my point of sharing this. The B side of the record, so to speak, the backstory is generally not as colorful as the things that we see posted. And this phenomenon isn't just for young people, it isn't just for the US, it's an international phenomenon. One researcher called it the cult of self. So the more time we spend cultivating an image of ourselves, the less likely it is that we will be able to see ourselves as we really are. So what can you do about this? Rather than manufacturing life's moments, measuring yourself by the number of likes that you get and getting caught up in that spiral of comparison, envy, and depression, remind yourself when you're about to post and when you see others, there is a B side, a backstory that many people tirelessly curate. And maybe you start, or rather stop, cultivating an image that isn't quite so accurate of yourself. And ask yourself, why am I doing this? Am I boasting? Am I sharing an accurate story? If people found out the truth, would they trust me on other things when it matters most? So, consider doing both of those and then getting feedback. Embrace it. It's a gift. If you can start beginning to see yourself as you truly are, both on the inside and how you come across to others, then you can make change. So even without a college or a colleague or a coach, notice people's expressions. Are they smiling? Do they have their arms folded? Do they run in the other direction when they see you? Take that feedback and learn from it. It really is a gift. So experiment with different kinds of behaviors, and we're going to cover some here and in the next session. So it's the right balance for you and for your culture and the culture within your organization. And ask yourself, do you ever lie to yourself? Can you trust your own motives and intentions? Do you consistently deliver on what you promise to do? When you act with honesty and reliability, others will see you as trustworthy too. And as you begin to think about and develop this self-awareness and begin to make changes in your behavior, some of which we'll touch on today, think about this. This is from Warren Buffett. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. Why is reputation important? Reputation is the measure of how much the community trusts you. You leave a reputation trail. As you reflect on your current behaviors and communication style, reflect on and truly get feedback on what others see, feel, and hear when they interact with you. Trust is not a screensaver that just whirs around in the background and you pull it out when you need it. It's the glue that holds organizations together. It's the glue that develops and strengthens relationships. The latest in equipment and beautiful buildings are helpful but not sufficient to build trust chips. Trust chips are built on interactions, one at a time, with the people who are there to serve the public. So beyond competence, getting to the next step, what can you do about this? John Maxwell, a leadership guru, said, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." And this can be cultivated by strengthening emotional intelligence. And perhaps many of you have heard about emotional intelligence and how it differs. It's different than IQ, and it can be built and grown. And there are many definitions of emotional intelligence I'm going to give you one that I learned from multi-health systems where I was trained. It's the ability to recognize and understand emotions in oneself and others, and the ability to use this awareness to manage our behavior and relationships. EI is not about, or emotional intelligence, not about being emotional or just being nice. It's not about being touchy-feelier in the workplace, because that will get you in trouble too. It's about understanding your own emotions and the impact your emotions have on others, and being able to read the emotional climate in the room. It's about being strategic and smart with your emotions. Whether you lead a team or an organization or interact with the public, accurately reading and responding to the emotional climate in the room is critical to your success. And the research actually shows that if you are able to improve your emotional intelligence and use them effectively and strategically, you'll become a better leader. Employees are more motivated and satisfied with the workplace. Leaders make better decisions, and leaders are trusted. And we all have the ability to do this. We do it all the time. We don't show up at a funeral and tell the latest joke. That's not the time for it. So I'm going to show you, this is the scales and subscales that multi-health systems uses. Others have 4 scales, and that's not important. And I teach whole seminars just on emotional intelligence. I'm just going to focus on one here, subscale, and one in the next session, because they relate to trust and effective communication. But just know that all of these areas can be grown and developed. The first one, self-perception, is really self-awareness, and I have already covered that here, so we'll continue on. The one that I want to focus on today is the subscale of empathy. It's part of the interpersonal relationship scale. The Center for Creative Leadership found that empathy is one of the critical skills that can improve a leader's chance of success. Empathy improves our ability to behave and speak in a way that adds trust chips to the scale. And that's why I wanted to talk about today. Being empathetic and being able to communicate clearly are critical in demonstrating you care. So let's get specific about empathy. Empathy is the ability to be aware of, understand, and appreciate the thoughts and feelings of others. It's a skill that allows you to see and experience the world from another's perspective and to respect their ideas, even when they differ from your own. So those with high levels of empathy have a fairly accurate read on other people's emotions, ensuring that peers or others feel comfortable sharing important information or feelings with you. People with high empathy usually imagine fairly accurately how others are feeling, and they can predict the emotional reactions of others. So when a person is able to use this understanding, which I'm going to go into in terms of developing, and put it into words, it helps strengthen relationships. And if a relationship was adversarial, using empathy can turn one of adversary into collaborative. Alternatively, when we're not so empathetic and we are angry or stressed, we ignore the power of empathy and we defend, attack, or argue our position, which simply causes the others to respond in kind in sort of a lockstep escalation, which is not productive for anyone. So let me tell you what empathy is not. Whoops, I guess I didn't put the second part of that up. So that's the actual definition. But let me tell you what empathy is not. It's not about being nice or sweet. Generally pleasant statements like your dress is pretty isn't empathy. It's also not misplaced optimism. Oh, don't worry, honey. I know you didn't get that promotion, but I'm sure you'll get the next one. That's not empathy, and particularly can be counterproductive if it's not honest and you don't have the facts to back that up. Empathy is not sympathy, but it's often mistaken as such. So sympathy puts into words your feelings about somebody else's experience. You say, I am sorry for your loss. In contrast, empathy puts the other person's feelings first. It usually starts with you statements. You seem really upset today. That's empathy. Empathy is not agreement with the other person. You don't have to agree with the other person to be empathetic. Just acknowledge them. So saying, yeah, he's a bully and agreeing with that, that's not empathy. Empathy is simply a better attempt to understand the other person by getting to know their feelings and perspectives. And empathy is not sharing an equally or worse experience to show that you get it or you've been there too. The person hearing your story won't feel better because you've experienced it or something worse. So if somebody shares a story about their recent cancer diagnosis, they're rarely comforted by the fact that you experienced it or your loved one experienced it. It's not empathy. So playing the comparison game is not empathy, even though we often confuse it as such. So I'm going to quickly go through this. People expect, well, I want to have high empathy. Not necessarily. People with high empathy, they find it hard to stay objective when strong emotions are involved. They find it hard to say no. So if you have too much empathy, you can get burned out, and it can interfere with rational decision making. So I'm not here to tell you to have the most empathy for the other person and get caught up in their stories. When you have high empathy and low self-awareness, in fact, you can get so caught up in other people's stories, you get burned out, you fail to do your own self-care, and you might be highly stressed. Alternatively, people with low empathy and high emotional self-awareness might care more about getting their own needs met, expect too much from others. So how does empathy play out in the court system? Empathy is an important part in the court system and contributes to trust chips. Unless it's an adoption, marriage, or citizenship event, many people come to court under very stressful situations, and you know that. They're missing work, they're defendants, they're jurors, they're victims, etc. And understand, and this is important, they didn't want to join your court club. You are not the meetup destination they chose. Yet at times, they're forced to be there, and be there often. If it's a litigant in a case, a victim in a criminal case, or a witness, just showing up at the courthouse evokes negative emotions and reminds them of something ugly that happened in their past. It's not something they want to relive, and yet they're being forced to do it on the stand. So understanding that when you interact with them, you're not the enemy. Understanding that they don't want to be there helps you develop empathy and appreciate how and why they're behaving the way they are, even when they're misbehaving. It may help you avoid making insensitive or defensive comments. And by responding with empathy and with that understanding that you're not their club they wanted to join, you can help develop trust chips and avoid building distrust chips. Now, it's a little bit of a fuzzy picture. It's an old photograph. So empathy is also helpful in building trust chips for the person and others on their happy day. When people come to court for their special day, whether it's an adoption like this one, a wedding, a citizenship ceremony, they have thought about that event for a very long time. They're looking forward to it. They're excited and want this experience to be a celebration. And you have a role in that experience, as does everybody from the moment they walk in the courthouse, from guards to clerks to bailiffs to judges. A smile, congratulations, positive motions and expressions add to their positive experiences at the courthouse. These courtesies and small gestures of kindness, such as this, go a long way in adding trust chips for the persons involved and their families. And remember, the next time that they come to court, they're going to remember those small gestures of kindness. And so while it might seem unnecessary or small because you're there to perform a task, having well-trained staff is good, but having well-trained staff that understand that they're playing a role in somebody's experience helps them respond with empathy, helps everybody in the courthouse be part of building trust chips. I'm not saying that you have to entertain like the Disney characters at Disneyland that wander around. I'm not saying that at all. But just appreciating that you are part of the experience in the courthouse and interacting with them beyond just accomplishing a task can go a long way to building trust chips. So let's get specific about strengthening trust chips. But before I do that, I'll tell you that little girl starts college next month. So, strengthening empathy. And it is hard to put it into accessible grab-and-go strategies, but here's a couple of things that you can do. First is building cognitive empathy, which is a skill that can also be understood as empathic accuracy. Having a more complete understanding that the person's thoughts and feelings and helps you predict or explain the other person's actions. So before you engage with somebody, think about what you know and be open and willing to learn more. And keep that in mind that as you do this, you're going to be interpreting their experience through your own bias and filters. So make yourself aware of that and try to set that aside. Perhaps you check in with statements that paraphrase what they said and why they're in front of you, and then ask, am I on the right track here? Did I get that right? That helps you to understand them more accurately. Developing cultural competence is key. Again, that could be a whole entire session. But I can tell you that in some Asian cultures, for example, direct eye contact is considered rude and disrespectful, especially if that person is interacting with somebody who's an older person. So if you know this and you can get some training or have some experience, and you see somebody who's not having direct eye contact with you, instead of getting angry with them, perhaps you simply understand it as a cultural phenomenon. I volunteer with a foreign exchange group of high school students. They're coming here around the world. They're all exchanging in about 2 weeks. And when we meet with them, we talk to them about cultural competence as well. We have to teach some of them even simple things like please and thank you, because in their home cultures and home countries, words of gratitude like that are just not common. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. So we just simply need to educate them. And you need to educate yourself because you see people from all over the world. So by perhaps doing research, perhaps finding opportunities to get to know other cultures, you'll be more accurate in your understanding of the others and not make a misstep by, for example, misunderstanding and responding negatively when someone's eyes are pointed down or looking down instead of at you. And don't be in a rush to judgment. Like I said, it could be a cultural difference, or there could be a reason why they're behaving that way. Let's say you're about to have a difficult conversation. You can work on and strengthen your empathy by practicing it. Maybe you role play it. Maybe you write it out so that you can really do this well. Be respectful of other people's reactions, but don't let them derail you. If you must deal with a tough topic, if they break down and cry, that doesn't mean that you have to avoid the topic or avoid that conversation. But you can notice it and respond by expressing that you know this is difficult for them. Give them a moment to be in their emotions. The next one, be careful about mirroring their emotions because it could make the situation worse. For example, if the other person's angry, responding with anger really will escalate problems quickly. And avoid proposing solutions until and only if they want it. Sometimes people just want to vent. You can perhaps ask them, are you interested in some of my experiences, what I think might actually help you? Perhaps you present it as an option to be adapted to their circumstances instead of this is what you must do. So having self-awareness along with these skills to use empathetic statements helps diffuse a situation and avoid growing distrust chips. But there are other ways that we can strengthen empathy and strengthen trust, and that's through communication skills, effective listening and communication skills. So listening is one of the least acknowledged leadership skills, but it's vital to effectiveness. whether it's at work, at home, and it's particularly important to have strong listening skills when demonstrating empathy and trying to build trust chips. And this is an area where you have a lot of control because you can control the quality of your listening. So, again, getting back to the ideas of tools that build trust, if you can ask questions and listen to answers in a thoughtful and caring way, a connection is formed, which improves trust, even if a client or a customer is not happy with the outcome. Think about a visit to a doctor's office. If a doctor actually takes the time to listen to you and your concerns, you're more likely to trust them, even if the procedure or the outcome wasn't what they had hoped. So, listening is a communication tool. It's the skill of accurately understanding what others are trying to communicate. It's listening to learn, not listening to respond or react. If you don't listen to others, you can't figure out how to influence and persuade them. And if you can listen to learn, it will help you hear their message and respond with what matters to them. So an example, when I was a trial lawyer, if I just read from a script and didn't listen to the judge's questions and hear about those concerns, I probably would never win. I would listen and respond to what the judge needed to hear, not just what I had on my piece of paper. In the business setting, and you might face this, budget concerns. Let's say you want to propose a new policy and everybody at the table starts talking about cost. If you don't change your message into cost-benefit analysis, you're not going to get your proposal passed. So listening is important to understand, and it's also important to develop rapport. Stephen Covey, who many have heard of, 7 Habits of Effective People, says, "Seek first to understand and then to be understood." So let's do a deeper dive. Reflective listening, and maybe you folks have heard of this. It's a form of active listening, and it's a skill of reflecting back to people their feelings or paraphrasing so that they know you understand them, and if you didn't get it right, you'll get clarification. When you can reflect back to them their feelings or paraphrase content, that person will feel heard and understood, and you'll develop a connection, which will allow them to truly hear what you have to say. For example, if a colleague comes into your office and is screaming about the latest proposal or policy you just made and you just voted for, that person needs you to acknowledge how angry they are. If you instead just defend it and defend how you voted, they will escalate their anger, and they will continue until you clearly see and show them you get that they're angry. After all, they came ready for a fight, ready to engage in a dispute, and it escalates problems, and it also increases the chances of creating distrust chips. So instead of defending yourself or arguing with them, starting with something like, "I am sorry that you're upset about this new policy. I can hear the frustration in your voice. Please, have a seat. Let's chat about that." They're likely to bring down that anger. Perhaps a person seeks help at the clerk's office. If they have those distrust chips in their pocket, they're likely to show up for a fight too. And they might be angry that their notice just said that their hearing will be moved by 6 months, which extends the problem that they're having by half a year. If your clerk argues and defends it and said, "Well, it's the first available time slot," that person will simply keep elevating their anger, and distrust chips will be built because they don't feel that fairness, justice, and access are being made available to them when they need it most. So until and unless you accurately reflect back their feelings, the other person will continue to yell and view you as unreasonable. So here's some examples. And obviously you can tailor this to how you would actually speak. "Bob, I can see that you're angry about the new policy. Let's talk about this." "Bob, you seem surprised by the new proposal. Seems like this came out of the blue for you. I'm sorry about that. Let's talk about that." So those are just some examples of reflective listening. Paraphrasing as well is simply saying, hey, did I, well, let me first just talk. Reflective listening isn't about agreement, and you don't have to agree, change your mind at all. Simply understand what they were saying and how they were feeling, and then they'll know the message was heard. Okay, paraphrasing content. The second aspect of reflective listening is paraphrasing content. And all you're doing is listening to them and responding to them. So if I understand you correctly, the issue is this. Did I get that right? So what I hear you say is blank. Am I on the right track here? That's paraphrasing. And they too, paraphrasing and reflecting back feelings, will help you interact with them in a way that builds trust chips. Some additional keys to effective listening. Being truly present. Research shows that the mere presence of a cell phone on the table negatively impacts the quality of relationships. So if your goal is to be effective, put the phone away and be present. Use effective eye contact. And again, so in the US in general, having direct eye contact is important, but also understand the cultural context where eye contact may not be. Listen actively, and I'm sure you've heard that. Ask open-ended questions without judgment. Things that will elicit more than a yes or a no answer. Make sure you know what they're actually trying to say. What do they want? Why are they saying it? Take some time to listen to that. Listen for what's not being said. I confess I usually figure that out after a conversation when I've had time to reflect. But if you can, think about what topics they're not saying. Again, drawing on my time as a trial lawyer, when a spouse never talks about where they met their now deceased husband or whatever, it never talks about the happy times. Perhaps it's a clue that they didn't have a good relationship. I don't know. But maybe they're not talking about something for some other reason. And you may not know unless you do some check-in statements, but just notice what's not being said. And notice their nonverbal communication. Are their arms folded? What are their facial expressions like? Are they grimacing? Again, some cultural context. In some cultures, facial expressions, there just aren't as much. It's called high context communication. So you won't necessarily be able to read all people all the time. But if you can just appreciate these nonverbal communication skills, are they nodding in agreement? Are their arms folded? Those will give you some clues. Don't make assumptions or butt in to offer solutions while listening to messages. Maybe they just want to vent. Perhaps you allow that for a little bit. And I'm saying, we don't have the time to let somebody vent all the time, and don't worry about chips in that moment if you only have 5 minutes. But perhaps you say to them, sounds like you have a lot on your mind. I don't have the time at this moment to truly hear what you need to say, but I do at 2:15. I have a 30-minute slot. Will that work for you? With the clerks facing the public, it can go on and on forever. And again, there's no easy solution to that. But perhaps you can help your clerk say, I get that you have a lot on your mind, and it sounds like it's in this such and such area, and direct them to maybe a social service agency or others who allow them to explain their story to somebody who can make it matter. So empathy, effective listening skills sound like good reminders. I get that. I ought to do that. But when they're used with good intention and practiced as a skill, you can develop trust chips. Alternatively, reacting to others, cutting them short, develops distrust chips. Perhaps consider thinking about what you say and your behaviors as building, you can be thinking of it this way. Is what's coming out of my mouth, or is how I'm behaving building one of these trust chips or a distrust chip? And sensitize yourself to about that. I'm going to get more specific into content in the next session, but I do want to just give you some communication techniques that might help foster trust here. So, the first one. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate early and often. And perhaps some of you experienced that when you were arriving here. So you ever feel your heart sink and your muscles in your neck tense when you see that your flight is delayed, like that JetBlue flight? And in those moments you're wondering, oh my God, when is that going to take off? What meeting am I going to miss? Do I need to just skip this flight altogether? Where's my luggage? And all these things start building up in you because you have no information other than you're not taking off on time. Now, think about a delayed sign with frequent updates, something like, we have a mechanical issue and we have our mechanics headed there right now. And then and we'll update you as soon as we know what the mechanics find. And then in 10, 20 minutes, whatever it is, mechanics have looked at the problem, diagnosed it, and they believe they can fix it in the next 30 minutes, and we're going to board right after that. Think about how you feel then. Think about how you can manage yourself. You can deal with whether it's the kennel, it's daycare, it's the meeting you're about to attend, or the meeting you might miss because it's delayed. But communicating when you know it makes a big difference in building trust chips. So frequent, honest communication builds trust chips, even if you communicate that you have no news. I was taught that on my first day as a lawyer to avoid malpractice suits. Respond to all calls in 24 hours. That was in the 80s. Now we have email, and you can do it immediately. Even if you simply say, got your call, got your email, wanted you to know it. I don't have any news now, but I may have it in 2 days. That helps build trust chips. What else can you do? Honest and ethical. Seems obvious. But white lies and shades of truth often backfire. And the price of mistrust is great. Helping others feel good in the moment, but frustrated, disappointed, or upset later is not really helping, and it moves the needle from trust to distrust. Take responsibility for your own mistakes. Apologize when necessary. Be consistently dependable and reliable. Do what you say and say what you do. And when you align what you do and what you say, you're building behavioral integrity, which is how you show trust to others. Behavioral integrity. I like this quote, and I keep it in mind often, from Viktor Frankl. He's a noted psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor. So he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I'd like you to think about that as you think about what kind of chips you're building. And as you do, remember, trust can't be purchased on Amazon or delivered to your door or held in your hand. And yet companies seem to, and organizations and individuals, package it, or at least they seem to, and sell it every day. But when they stumble and do not deliver on what they promised or fail to meet expectations, the price is huge. When trust exists in our homes, life is good. But when it seemingly walks out the door, our home feels like it's about to crumble, even if the structure and roof are solid. When we find trust in our community or in our court system, we have confidence in the world around us. Yet our world shatters when it's broken. When it's fostered at work, we feel good no matter how demanding the work is. When it's absent, work becomes a chore and becomes harder than ever, perhaps barely tolerable, no matter how large that paycheck. So as you consider your response to others, whether it's how you speak or behave or both, remember each is an opportunity to develop chips, and they are going to develop with each interaction on either the trust or distrust side. I hope what I said today and what I'll say in the next session will help you build trust chips. And I know that we were running a little late today, And I know we want to get back on track. So I'm not going to take questions right now, but I am happy to respond to emails, telephone calls. So feel free, whether you're here or you're elsewhere, send me your questions, happy to answer them. So with that, thank you for your time and attention.